All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the MediaJel podcast. My name is Guillermo Bravo. I'm the chief evangelist here at MediaJel. At MediaJel, we're focused on connecting cannabis, CBD, and alcohol brands to compliant consumer audiences at every stage of the customer journey. I'd like to introduce to you Jacob Litke, the CEO of MediaJel. Welcome to the show, Jake.
Thank you, sir. How are you doing today?
Fantastic, fantastic. Where are you dialing in from today?
I am in sunny Walnut Creek, California today, near San Francisco.
Nice, nice. Enjoying the weather out there. I'm sure some of our audience from the New England and Midwest is experience a little harder, a little rougher weather.
Yeah.
right now. Well, let's give a few moments for everyone to join here, and I guess we can kick it off with a little bit of insight into your background and what inspired you to create MediaJel.
Sure. So, we started MediaJel about 4 years ago now, specifically to address a problem that we saw, which was that cannabis brands lacked access to modern digital advertising tools, such as retargeting, being able to do revenue attribution. And they also lacked access to mainstream advertising inventory. The cannabis industry still, in many ways, is sort of relegated to the kids' table when it comes to advertising. And we've been on a mission to change that. So in addition to the technology that we've built, we've also formed partnerships with major publishers on the mainstream publisher side. So, things like, as opposed to being able to only advertise in, Weed Maps or Leafly, which are, great advertising channels for endemic, but we really want to allow the cannabis industry to advertise the same way that the CPG industry does. So, getting ads on the Weather Channel and Rolling Stone and working with companies like Hearst and Condé Nast and Smart Ad Server is a huge partner for us. Our partnership with them allows us, really gives us the largest set of inventory for cannabis approved advertising. So all of the publishers that we work with know that we're serving cannabis ads. They know we understand the rules and creative guidelines. And so we don't ever get campaigns shut down because everything we're doing is completely above board.
That's good to hear. I mean, it's providing that certainty in regards to compliance, which is a key factor that you need to do before we launch campaigns. Can you give me a little insight into just programmatic advertising as a whole?
Sure. So it's interesting. People kind of use similar words to mean the same thing. Programmatic advertising is really a methodology for buying, right? So that means that the impressions are being made available in an auction format similar to the stock market. People bid on impressions. So that is the methodology that we use. However, the actual advertising category is more accurately described as display advertising, right? And so display advertising itself has a bunch of different categories. People are very used to seeing, banner ads or native ads, video, but it also includes things like digital out of home, connected TV, anything that is digital at this point, we have access to. And it allows for a lot of upper funnel work, brand awareness, and building an audience that allows you to move people down through the funnel. And we've built in the attribution part as well, right? So we can actually measure sales against your advertising activity, which helps get rid of a lot of the opaqueness that can happen in digital advertising where people spend money, but they're not really sure what's happening.
Yeah, and that's one of the benefits of programmatic advertising, right? Is the ability to track the return on investment for each marketing campaign. What are some of the other benefits of programmatic advertising?
Well, it gives you the ability to be very precise in the audience you want to reach. So, every day there's billions, if not maybe trillions of ad impressions that are available. And so what we do is try to make sure that each one of those impressions, while the individual impressions are, talking about pennies or fractions of a penny for each one, it still does add up. And of that huge amount of available impressions, you want to try to be as targeted as possible. So it allows us to do things like I mentioned earlier, create retargeting audiences based on people that have been to your site or purchased in the past. And then we create an audience that is comprised of those addressable identifiers, so like device IDs, first-party cookies. And then when we see all of these impressions come through, we've got a filter, right? And that filter says, I only want to bid on these impressions that match the audience that I'm trying to reach.
Got it. So what would be an example of a way you can get your ads in front of the right audience?
So we've got a whole bunch of tools. And we use them for different things, but some real clear examples would be using geospatial data. We have a large amount of data that comes from people that have opted in to share their information, through tens of thousands of different applications. So it is opt-in audiences, but we can do things like draw polygons around all the dispensaries in a given market, create device IDs create an audience of those device IDs, and then again, use those for targeting. So geospatial is one thing we can do. Retargeting off of your existing audience is another. We also have access to the complete array of audiences that exist in the general advertising ecosystem. And those are provided by, companies like IRI or Epsilon, and these companies aggregate credit card information, right? So if you wanted to be very specific, let's say you are a cannabis beverage company, and you want to do conquest targeting against, let's say, people that buy ciders, right? Because you've got a campaign around that. We do have the ability to build an audience that these are known purchasers of ciders, and even down to specific brands. And again, use those as targeting criteria. And we will break up campaigns into tactics. So each line item will have different tactics, right? We have the geospatial conquesting, we have purchase history, and we can measure the success of those audiences, and we can measure that in comparison with the creatives that you might be running, right? So maybe you've got a dozen different creatives, you've got 6 different audiences, and our ad ops team, when we work with advertisers, we're a full service display campaign. So that means that we have, customer success manager that works with the advertisers. We have an ad operations team that's looking at your campaign every day, seeing which publishers are giving you the best engagement. And those publishers vary wildly geographically in terms of which ones are driving sales, right? So the same publishers in Michigan that are driving sales, these are apps and websites, are actually very different than the ones that are driving sales in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and the performance for ad just depends on the market and the types of media. Like where can ads actually be displayed? Like what kind of devices and mediums?
Yeah, at this point, it's everything, right?
Okay.
We have access to, even as far as connected TV. So when we start working with a new advertiser, most of the time, people aren't aware of what is possible today. So, we have tens of thousands of publishers across all those different mediums. So connected TV is something we bring up. We don't see a lot of that happening today. I think a byproduct, or a reason for that rather, is that people don't know that they can run a 30-second television ad. You can, and there are still limitations, right? So we aren't able to run ads on Hulu today, but we are able to run ads on like Sony Crackle and Tubi, and some of the publishers that may not be attached to a publicly traded corporation that's a little more concerned about federal legislation.
Got it. And as far as campaign examples, can you give me a few examples on different ways that we can target audiences? So, you talked about conquest targeting. What is conquest targeting? And what other campaign types can we run?
Yeah, so a conquest campaign is kind of what it sounds like, which is trying to capture customers either from your competition or from maybe adjacent categories. I mentioned, cannabis beverages are a pretty easy one to use as an example. Yeah. But really, you could use any kind of category, right? You could, if it could be events, it could be people that go to specific types of stores, depending on what your product category is. And, we've seen this evolve quite a bit recently, where marketers are getting more sophisticated with their tactics and who they're trying to serve ads to, as they better understand their audience, and who's actually purchasing their products.
Understood. And then what type of KPIs should an advertiser be measuring to gauge the performance?
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on the advertiser. I'll break them into the 2 major buckets that exist today. We have retailers and delivery in one bucket, and then we've got brands in another. And brands in our industry have had a difficult time measuring success, because they're generally not connected to the purchase, right? There is some amount of D2C or direct to consumer marketing that's happening for some brands, but largely the sales are coming through the dispensary. And that is a complicated ecosystem between the POS, the e-com platform, and sales that are happening in the store. So for most of our delivery and dispensary advertisers, they're really at this point measuring things on sales, right? And that's why we built our attribution model, so we can show the direct correlation between your advertising efforts and actual purchases that consumers are making. Now, there is a lot of value that we're building on the brand equity front. And I do continue to believe that as things progress, the brands that are successful in building a lot of brand equity and relationship with consumers will eventually win the game, right? You see this happening now, especially in California, where you've got the cost of flower has gone down so much, right? And there's so much availability of great product. It's becoming more of a game of what is the brand, right? And can you build that relationship with the consumer? So I don't think that's being measured as well as it could be in terms of like brand lift by a lot of the retailers. And I think that's a byproduct of just how difficult it is to be a retailer today. Most of the retailers are very, very focused on, this week's, next week's sales, next month's sales. But a byproduct of the successful advertising we're doing now is we are actually building a lot of brand equity for our advertisers. So that's one KPI. To answer it a little more fully, we do have advertisers that are looking to do signups, like, specifically first-time customers or people that want to build up their CRM list. So getting people to sign up for, whatever newsletter promotions they might have. And so, those are some of the main KPIs.
Okay. And then in addition to that, the obviously top line revenue for e-commerce sales, if you are a retailer, in-store foot traffic could be another one. We do measure that as well, again, with the geospatial data that we have access to. So separate from measuring a specific sale, we also monitor the physical locations for the customers we have that are retailers. And we can measure and see, these are devices that we serve ads to, and then these are the devices that subsequently showed up within some sort of window. Usually it's a 30-day window of, when an ad was displayed and when a device walked into the store. And those are comparative to each other. They don't, someone walking into a store that we get from a device observation doesn't necessarily mean that they purchased something, although the cannabis industry is unique in the ratio of people that walk into a store and purchase something, right? There's definitely most people that walk into a dispensary do buy something. Exactly. And you touched on, building brand equity, and there's different tactics that you can, there's different ways you can leverage programmatic to really showcase that your message and your values. Like, one great example I'd say is native content ads. Can you give me an example of what a native ad is and how you can use it to build your brand equity?
Yeah, so a native ad unit is a ad unit that is formatted to look like it's part of the website that you're viewing. And the most common thing that people will recognize is if you go to CNN.com, there's a bunch of posts in there that are really a product advertisement, but it is formatted to look like it's on the site. And a native ad unit is actually a different type of thing to create, because what you create is, a lifestyle image. So not necessarily a product image, but a lifestyle image so that it fits in with sort of the editorial nature of where it's going, and a headline and a body copy. And those pieces are sent kind of as raw data, and then it's up to the website to format those, right? And that's what you want, the font and the sizing to look like it is native to the publication. Those types of ads tend to work best when you have a funnel on the post-click side. Once you've got someone to engage with the ad and they click on it, native ads are great for when you're sending someone to something that's kind of educational in nature or has more of a reading type of context. Because you've already got someone who's reading a piece of content, and you bring them over in a sort of linear fashion. And then you bring them to ideally something that's educational. That's a huge thing in our industry. The consumers need education, the brands need education. And so the native ads work really great for that type of campaign.
Wonderful. And you touched a little bit on advertising on TV. Are there any limitations in regards to advertising on television? And, what's the difference between, say, streaming TV versus, as you said, something on CNN?
Yeah, so on video, you've got a couple of different ways that goes. You can have something like a pre-roll video that might play inside of an application. A common example of this is, like there's a video game or there's some piece of content, they make you watch a video prior to getting the content. And that's usually a mobile or tablet first experience.
Okay.
And in that type of experience, you have more of an opportunity for like some click-through behavior, right? To get someone to go somewhere. When you are advertising on a television, the consumer's not touching a device. Now, commonly people will put like a QR code or something, but really when you're talking about in-home connected television advertising, that's more about brand awareness. But the good news is you can orchestrate that as part of your funnel. So you can start with running some connected TV ads, and all of those ad impressions that you serve can go into a retargeting pool. So then you can give them more of a call to action or direct response follow-up campaign.
Wonderful. And then are we able, are you able to connect with like gaming consoles and other devices like that as well?
That does exist.
Okay.
We haven't really done a lot of that. I think it's a little bit outside of what people are thinking about doing today. And then the gaming consoles, again, are their own ecosystems. And you said, what are there limitations? And the answer is yes, there's limitations to everything, right? So, we say that, we operate primarily in the US. We do work with some advertisers in Canada and Puerto Rico, where you are. But it's really like operating in 38 different countries. Every state has its own rules. Now, when you're doing connected TV or OTT, you don't have to deal with the FCC, right? Which is great. You don't really want anything with the word federal in front of it when you're doing advertising. But every state is very different, even down to how you get an ad approved. We have generally master trust with our publishers. They know the ads that we're going to put on their sites are safe for them. But you still have regulations, right? So there's specific states that have, like Minnesota and Pennsylvania. If you want to run a campaign in those states that's related to cannabis, you actually have to get each particular piece of creative approved by the government in that state, which sometimes is quick and other times is not.
We've run into that, with Pennsylvania and some other states that require a lot of manual review for actually ads to be published, right? So just have to be patient on those. As far as what differentiates MediaJel from other ad companies, can you go into that a little bit?
Sure. So we as a company started off and have continued to be a business that's trying to enable the cannabis industry as a whole, right? Okay. And so I think that is while it's not necessarily a technical differentiator, it does differentiate the way that we run our business and how we partner with our customers. We really do care about what's happening with our customers. We know that the struggle is real for them. And we also know that advertising dollars that they're spending are precious, right? I mean, if you talk about the implications of 280E, right? 280E, if you're operating as a retailer, you are a licensed cannabis business and you don't get to write off your advertising dollars the same way that other industries do. So we take it very serious when people make investments in advertising through us to make sure that they're getting a good ROI, because we have a vested interest in our customers being successful.
Yeah, agreed. And then, can someone run multiple programmatic ad campaigns with different companies together?
You can. You need to be very conscious about how you do that, and we do that sometimes with some of our marketers, because they have some other channels that they're running. We as a company we're not like an agency of record. We're not trying to be an agency and take over the whole marketing department for a company. We're trying to enable some specific channels. So it does come up where maybe they've got an internal media buyer that's doing some specific things. And we have a few different ways that we can avoid conflict there, because what we don't want to be doing is bidding against ourselves on behalf of the advertiser, right? So when that comes up, we'll do things like silo publishers potentially, or channels, right? So maybe someone's running video already through something they have and they want to run native ads. Native ads and videos are not going to conflict with each other, and they're not going to bid against each other. So we can either do channel separation or we can do publisher separation. Sometimes someone has maybe a direct buy they've done with, like the Chive, and they've done a direct buy there. So we'll just block out the Chive in our ad buy, so we make sure we're not competing against ourselves.
Okay. And you mentioned agencies. Like how does MediaJel collaborate with an agency to execute on a campaign?
Sure. We work with quite a few agencies as channel partners. We've built our platform to be set up as a white label solution when needed. So we have a strong direct business, but we also have a strong channel partner business. And we give our channel partners a version of our dashboard that is branded for them. They're the ones that are selling into the advertiser, and they're the ones that are managing the account. And most of the time, the advertiser doesn't necessarily know who MediaJel is. We don't need to be, we don't need them to know who we are. So we do have two parts of our business, our direct business, and then enabling other agencies that want to be able to offer this service, which is pretty complicated. We've spent years building a very large technology stack, and we've made it pretty easy to use. And so we can help someone who may be offering, creative services or social media services. If they want to add in, some programmatic buying, we can help them do that.
Wonderful. And, Apple and other companies are talking a lot about third-party cookies. With all the changes occurring in privacy, will that have an impact in programmatic in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of impacts that are happening there. It is a rapidly evolving landscape. One of the things that we did early on, because we had the same issues that most people had in the cannabis space, which they were blocked from being able to buy ads through. There's kind of two parts of the auction. You have the demand side and the supply side, and we represent the demand side. We are buying inventory. Most of the demand side platforms don't take cannabis at all, right? So that's kind of why we built our own technology. But part of doing that is we kind of just went around and connected directly on the supply, right? And that's our partnership with Smart helped us do that. And because we are buying at the sell side level, bypassing the demand side level, we get rid of a lot of barriers. But a side effect of that maybe we didn't entirely plan for, but turns out to be a good benefit, is that we're sitting directly on the supply side. So there's, the difference between a third-party cookie and a first-party cookie today makes all the difference in the world, right? Because our connection and our signals that we're getting aren't going through a demand platform, through the exchange, whatever number of intermediaries that might be tacking on fees, and getting to the supply side. Because we sit on the supply side, a lot of the issues that are happening on third-party cookies are not affecting us.
Oh, well, that's a relief, right?
It is, yeah. It came out of necessity, but it turned out to be a pretty good advantage for us.
Yeah. As far as leveraging programmatic in combination with search engines, right? Google's responsible for 93% plus of all search traffic online in the United States. What's an example on how we can pair the two strategies to support each other?
Sure. And that's part of why we came together with your team, right? Because historically you had been working in the paid search and the SEO arena, and we have been working strictly on the paid media side. But we noticed over time that most of the last click activity is coming from search behavior, right? Yeah. We're running ads and we're doing brand awareness and we're showing people your brand in that market and whatever offers you might have. But ultimately, most people are not going to interrupt their reading or video viewing experience or gaming to go place an order right away, right? But they see an offer, they're like, oh, there's 30% off here, or buy one, get one for a penny, or whatever it is. They're usually not clicking right through and making a purchase. But because we have our multi-touch attribution model, we could see that people were coming in, they were getting impressions, and then some number of days, usually 3 to 6 days after that, they're going and making a purchase. And then we kind of went backwards and said, okay, why are they making that purchase? Because we could see the purchase. And we can look at the site behavior, we can see that people are coming in through organic or paid search, right? So what we want is when someone goes and connects, goes on Google and says cannabis delivery near me, we want the brands that we're working with, they're going to show up in that first set of fields, or we'll do a paid ad. We can do paid search on Google very, very carefully, but we can do that. And so you've either got a paid ad or got an organic ad showing up, and that really is the middle of the buyer's journey.
Okay. And can you give me an example of, a campaign that we'd run and where the customer would see us along that on that buyer's journey? I'm shopping for absolute extracts in San Francisco. Where might I see examples of these ads? Walking around town on my phone, where would I?
Yeah, so it's the bulk of it. I mentioned we do work in digital out of home, and we've even got ads we can run in the back of Ubers and stuff. But the bulk of it is still going to happen where people are, right, where they're spending their attention, and that is primarily going to be on mobile. and then some amount of desktop. And so it is, like I said, there's tens of thousands of apps. So depending on where you are and what you're doing, you could see an ad happening, as I mentioned, in a game, on the news, checking the weather, all of those different places. And we do, with retargeting, we do tend to follow people around. I mean, everyone is used to this. You go and search for like red sneakers in Amazon, you're going to see ads for red sneakers. We're doing the same exact thing for cannabis. People have different opinions on whether that's annoying or invasive, but it's certainly very effective and common.
Yeah, right. I mean, marketing rule of 7, you need to stay top of mind, and people need to see your brand at least 7 times before they'll make a purchase decision. Right?
Yeah, 7, 10, 12, 20. Everyone has different numbers, but
yeah,
it is true. You see, you do need to see a brand a certain number of times before you start to give it credibility in your mind.
Yeah. Then you touched on multi-touch attribution model. What does that mean? And what technology does MediaJel have in place that's different from the others in the industry?
Yeah, so we have, and this is an important thing because a lot of times when we start a conversation with someone, they want to talk about lookalike audiences because they're used to Facebook, and the way that we operate is basically the opposite of what Facebook is doing, right? So we are very PII compliant, personally identifiable information. We don't store that anywhere. We don't have anyone's name. We don't know who people are, right? So we don't do lookalike audiences. What we track are devices, phones and tablets and desktops, how they behave offline and online. And so what we can do is we understand when an impression is served, it sends a signal into our collector, and then we can match that against our audience graph, which again is, there's no personal information in there. There's anonymized identifiers. But what that allows us to do is understand that we served an ad to someone or a couple ads on their phone, last week, and then this week they went on their desktop and made a purchase. But because there's signals in there that you can tie together, that's the multi-touch part, right? Where we know that we can serve someone an ad across multiple properties, across multiple devices, and still maintain that signal strength in an anonymized way and say this purchase had this behavior that led up to that purchase.
Understood. And I want to take a little break here at the halfway mark and reach out to our audience. If you'd like to ask a question, if you go down to the bottom here, you can see the Q&A functionality of Zoom, and you can ask us any questions that you have for Jake. Jake's going to start taking questions from the audience, so feel free to post your questions there, and we'll start to answer those shortly. Jake, as far as the evolution of programmatic advertising, like where do you see this technology going in the future?
The whole programmatic, that's a big question. Well, yeah, you touched on some of the things that's happening in terms of identification, cookieless identifiers. Yeah. There are a number of solutions in the market today, but it changes from week to week. Like even a few months ago, Google said they were adopting Flock, which was this idea of creating cohorts. But then someone realized that wasn't as privacy compliant as they thought it was. Now they have topics. So it is always going to be changing. We try to handle those changes on behalf of our customers so that they don't have to worry about those things, right? And there's also legislation that happens in individual states, right? So like California has CCPA, right? Which is different than GDPR. And every time one of these new laws comes out, we make the necessary adjustments, right? So, we have our collector, but we have the ability to, we have all the do not track forms. You can go in, you can put in your name or email or whatnot and say, do not track me. We take in all those signals daily and then scrub that information, from our identity graph.
Wonderful. And then one thing I'm curious about is like, if I had if I have an application, Apple approved Cannabis as far as allowing orders through mobile apps, like what type of campaign could I leverage through Programmatic to encourage people to install my mobile app?
Yeah, so you can come up with a few different tactics to do that. The first one is going to be leveraging your existing information that you have. So if you are a delivery or dispensary and you have, most of them, because of the nature of regulations, have identities on their customers. They have an email address or a phone number. we can onboard that information again in a privacy compliant way that, you take the email addresses, they go through a hashing algorithm, which makes them anonymized. But that hashed version is now, that functions within our identity graph. So we can take, a hashed email address and we can turn that into an addressable identifier like a device ID, right? And then we can run a campaign and we can run a campaign for people that are your customers. We can take the stuff I mentioned earlier in terms of other cannabis consumers in that market. We can make that a targeted audience as well. And then you would probably want to run that ad in all app inventory, right? Because you've got someone who's in an app right now, and the click through, you take them, right to the app store where the app is there to download.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Steve Nolan has a question here. What is your experience using programmatic working with a new brand versus an established brand? Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it comes up quite a bit. A lot of the brands in cannabis are new, and there is an amount of brand awareness work that needs to happen for a new brand in order for people to make purchases. If you have, you just started Acme Cannabis and you open your doors and you start running ads, you're not going to get immediate traction. And this is a thing that we have to educate people about, because again, people are used to doing Instagram and Facebook ads, which is a very specific direct response channel. You do have to build, the marketing funnel exists in cannabis as well, right? So you have your upper funnel, brand awareness, you have your middle funnel, which is engagement, and then you have your lower funnel, conversion. If you don't put anything in the top of your funnel, you cannot take action at the bottom of your funnel. I would say with cannabis brands like retailers and product manufacturers, it's a little bit easier. When you start to talk about the CBD space, the challenges are greater. The CBD space as a whole is crowded, and there's a lot of not necessarily great messaging going on in that space. So you have to overcome consumer trust, but you have to build your brand as well. There's a lot of great products out there that are bootstrapped, right? And they're like, okay, I have a great product, I want to get it out there, and then I want to run a campaign. But it's not like you can't skip go, right? You do have to do the work around brand awareness. So if you just start a new product and start running programmatic ads, that's not going to translate to sales immediately.
Got it. And then a follow-up question would be, how do you establish KPIs for these new brands?
Yeah. So most people come in the door with one KPI, which is selling things. Yeah. And that is the important end goal, but we kind of have to frequently back up a little bit and say, okay, who are you trying to advertise to? And again, we'll sometimes get the answer of everyone, right? Well, that's also not a good answer, because it's just not going to be effective. You do need to have some idea of who you're trying to reach. And you really need to have an entire marketing strategy. The programmatic or even paid search is a tool inside of a marketing strategy. If you don't have like a campaign message or a value proposition that you've been able to define that we can communicate to the consumer, we frequently, when we meet with new advertisers, tell them that they're not actually ready to do programmatic advertising, and give them some guidance. While we're not an agency, we can kind of point them in some directions and say, you have a website and a store. That is not a marketing funnel. You need to be able to demonstrate value to the consumer, and you need to probably make a landing page. You need to do some things to get them through the funnel. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Yeah, I'm following. So another question from the audience here: outside of cannabis related behavior, what else do we know about the audience? What can we learn about the audience from our platform?
Sure. So once we've started to build an audience, and that audience could come from having the pixel on your site or the results of a campaign, we do, with our identity graph, have the ability to start to append demographic information, right? So devices can be in an anonymous way, in aggregate, linked to specific households or zip codes, which then can bring in demographic information. And we do have some analytics charts that will show things like, this is the rough gender or income of the people that are making purchases, to better help you refine your tactics.
Wonderful, wonderful. And switching gears to social media, Companies are facing shadow bans through social media. How do you recommend protecting your cannabis brand from getting shadow banned? I mean, it's somewhat related to social media or somewhat related to marketing, but any insights there on alternatives?
Well, be careful.
Yeah.
I mean, we specifically have built our system to avoid the problem that social media has of shadow banning, right? And we see that sometimes with advertisers that come in, maybe on the CBD side or on the cannabis side, and they have creatives or they have campaigns that are designed to be vague, right? Because they don't want to get shadow banned. We don't have that issue with what we're doing because all of our publishers know what we're serving. And so we frequently have to say, okay, we want to revise your creative because you're selling CBD or you're selling cannabis. So you need to say that. Because the other thing you don't want, in between the display of the creative and when the consumer clicks on the ad and they go somewhere, if they didn't understand what it was you were trying to tell them because you were trying to be vague and say it's not really cannabis, it's something else, when they get there, you've got a much lower chance of converting that consumer because they didn't really know what they were doing. I personally don't have a lot of advice on social. Our solution was to go completely around the walled gardens of social and Google and Facebook, and allow cannabis brands to get to the same people, the exact same people, but when they're in a different app or when they're on a different site than, Facebook or Instagram.
And it's important to know the history of social media, right? And Facebook and Instagram are part of the public company, so they can't promote a federally illegal substance, right? So that's kind of the first phase. And you are limited on what you can say. You can't promote the sale or use. If you post a deal or do a product drop and say it's on sale, like boom, you're going to get banned. So it's very limited on what you can say with social media, and that's where you can leverage programmatic, where you can be explicit with your language and images and everything that you say to the audience, because the publishers are well aware that you're advertising cannabis and you're not hiding anything. You can show the use, you can show someone smoking a joint, you can say there's a deal.
Sometimes you can. There's state laws and federal laws in Canada that prevent some of that. So the things that we can do from a creative perspective and imagery, like in Colorado, are very different from, actually, in a weird play of irony, Canada actually has the most restrictive advertising laws, even though it's federally legal, right? Because the federal government has established laws. And when you're running ads in Canada, you have to be very, very conservative. You really can't use much imagery at all. So it is still, there's an intersection of the state, city, municipal laws, and then what the publishers will accept. And some of the more premium publishers, when you're working with someone like Hearst, right, or Condé Nast, they do want to understand the domain that you're advertising. So there's a little bit more of a high touch account management interaction that goes on there, because we'll get a new advertiser, we'll say, this is the domain, and primarily, they're very concerned about brand safety. So their ad team wants to look at it. They want to look at the website that it's leading to and make sure that that is compliant, it has an age gate, and it is not, sort of egregious maybe in its display.
Yeah. And then speaking of, Google ads on the paid search side versus programmatic, like what are the differences between the two? What can you show versus not show between the two channels? Yeah.
So I've outlined pretty good detail what we can do on the programmatic side, which is everything inside of the state laws. We can pretty much do in programmatic, and we can advertise cannabis, and frequently we can show pictures of flower in the ads. I'll actually turn what you can do with paid search question back onto you, because you're more of an expert on that. When you're setting up campaigns, or the search team is setting up those campaigns, what are the common things that advertisers think that they want to do versus where we have to coach them and say, well, you can't exactly do this. You do need to be a little more vague.
Yeah, it's in first of all, as you said, compliance is king, right? So focus on compliance before you're launching any campaigns, and you can count on our ad ops team, but also take accountability in-house and make sure that your legal team is looking at this first. And then in regards to Google, a lot of it starts with the copy. So you can't use cannabis related terms in the copy. You can't promote the sale of the product within the actual ad copy, nor have that content on the landing page. So you have to be really conservative with the language that you use within ads, especially specifically for Google. So as far as using display advertising, we can't show the use. We can't show flower. We cannot show any of that when you're running a Google display ad. You have to be more lifestyle, right? So you have to get more creative on the different ways that you can subtly share your message within the compliance limitations of Google. Like we just can't show that. So hope that helps answer some of the questions here.
Well, and it's getting more strict with Google, right? I mean, in terms of I know they updated their disapproval policy.
Yeah.
And if you're not careful, you'll get your account permanently disapproved. And that's something that happened, a couple months ago? When did that happen?
Yeah, I think that was Q4 of last year. So now if you're running Google ads and they get disapproved because you're not within the guidelines, you have 3 chances to really remedy that. And if you don't kind of meet their expectations on staying within their regulations, then they'll just completely shut down your account. So that's just like receiving the social media notification that your account's been shut down. It's kind of the same thing if Google ads, like you log in one day and if you're not you're not within compliance, then you're going to get that, hey, you're shut down and you'll no longer be able to use this platform. So definitely move forward with caution when running those type of ads. And then transitioning back to programmatic, we touched a little bit on how long it takes to see results. Can you give me some examples of like a timeline? Like how long should people wait before they can really make a decision on the success of their campaign?
When we start off, we usually set up a campaign on a 90-day flight.
Okay.
And that gives us time to learn. And we'll usually recommend scaling the budget up over time. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, each brand is going to connect with a different audience, and different publishers will work better and different regions will work better. So we'll set up campaigns usually with a few different tactics. We'll set up a prospecting line item, which is something that's going to be sort of a general area.
Yeah.
Do it in a radius around the location or locations. We'll make some educated guesses on specific audience types that we want. Like I said, the geospatial stuff, or we think that purchasers of this particular type of product or visitors to these types of venues are going to be likely buyers. And we're pretty good at that. Although we are always surprised with the data, right? I mean, it's test and learn with this stuff. You want to cast kind of a wide net and then have some precision tactics as well. But the wide net will unearth data points that you will be surprised by almost every time. And then we can start to focus things in on those specific things that are converting best. And that, going back to Steve's question earlier, it's different when you have a established brand versus a brand new brand, right? So like we are running quite a bit of media for a popular delivery service in California. That delivery service in California has been putting billboards up for a long time, right? So their brand recognition is really strong within the state. So when we start running media for a company like that, that's going to translate to sales really quickly. If you're a brand new company, it's going to take weeks, maybe months before you really start to see traction.
Wonderful. And as far as ancillary businesses, how can advertisers place ads, for B2B, for example, like a headset or a BDSA?
Yeah. So doing B2B requires a combination of using some of the B2B channels. So we work in partnership with companies, like LeafWire, the Cannabis Marketing Association, to help enable their audiences to advertise to them. And then we do have some amount of things that we can do on the pure programmatic side, right? So we've gone through the work of, building geoframes around all of the cannabis conferences that happen in the US. And man, there are a lot of cannabis conferences now. I think the cannabis industry is leading the league in most conferences for the actual size of the industry. There's probably one every year.
Definitely.
So we can build audiences of people that we know are in the industry, and then we can serve ads to them, wherever they may be. I will say that overall, the B2B campaigns are not going to be as broad scope in terms of budget as something like most of the consumer work we do. When we're advertising to all of California for delivery, you have just a much bigger reach that's available. And so you can spend more money, do more advertising. The B2B campaigns, by their very nature, are going to be smaller budgets because you're just trying to reach a much smaller audience.
And can you give me some insight into scaling a budget for let's say an MSO for one location to 10 locations and what that would look like?
Yeah. So we will frequently, when we start with a new an MSO or even a single state that's got multiple locations, we will usually set up the budget, and it will be relative to the population density in that area. Okay. And we'll usually start with a handful of locations. We'll learn some things. Again, this is a test and learn thing, right? We don't want to just come out of the gate and spend all the money and realize we wasted a bunch of it. So we'll pick a few locations. We'll start to run media. We'll figure out what is resonating with that particular audience, and then we'll scale it up from there. And so we would usually set a budget per location, figure out what's working, and then roll that out to other locations. And again, it would be, if it's a small rural area, you really only probably can spend a few $1,000s given, the available audience there. But if you're in, Metro Detroit or LA, you could, practically, spend as much money as you wanted to. There's not really a limited reach there.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point. Like how are campaigns different when you are in like a rural state versus a rural city versus, let's say you're in Ukiah versus San Francisco. How are the campaign like targeting and customer targeting? How is that different between the two?
Well, first of all, I don't think anyone on this call other than you and I knows where Ukiah is. But so a small town in California near wine country. One is your budget is going to be smaller. Two is you're likely to have less competition. So there's less conquesting that's going on. More brand awareness, and more trying to the overused term "kind of curious," trying to capture new customers, right? That aren't cannabis consumers at all. And then that gets again into the post-click experience. We've run a lot of campaigns where we've run a campaign for essentially the same product in the same area or the same retail service, and one of them could have a 100% better performance than the other. Yeah. And that actually comes down to something that's mostly outside of our control, which is the post-click experience. What happens when you get someone to click on your ad? And this is another thing that people, if you're not experienced with display advertising, to understand is that if you're used to doing things on Facebook and you're selling, dog food to dog lovers, and you've got a very direct correlation there, you're going to have a higher CTR. You're going to have a higher level of engagement. With display advertising,
what's CTR before you?
Oh, sorry. Your click-through rate. How many people click on your ad?
Okay.
So with display advertising, it's more like you're waving at a lot of different people, and we do our best to target those waves that you're doing. But when you get someone to wave back at you, that's the click, and then you get a chance to talk to them. Now, if you're trying to advertise to someone who's not a current cannabis consumer, you can't just take them from an ad and drop them onto your storefront, right? Because you haven't, if you run a retail operation, that the consumer needs to talk to someone. They need to get some level of education about what it is they're looking for. So you usually want to tie your audience that you're targeting to a landing page or a specific experience on the other side of the click. And that is where you see a huge difference in terms of ROI of driving people again through that funnel. If you just if you just take someone cold off the street that doesn't know your brand, doesn't really understand cannabis, and you throw them to either a product page or just your shopping cart, your chance for success is pretty low.
Got it. Got it. And then, just a reminder, everyone in the audience, you have about 10 more minutes. So if you have any questions, please post them in the bottom of the Zoom chat in the Q&A function. I know in the pay-per-click advertising, there's some discussions around like fraudulent clicks. Like, what do you put in place to ensure that the efficacy and make sure that there is no fraudulent clicks for any of our customers?
Yeah, well, I'll start off by saying you're never going to eliminate 100% of the fraud, right? It's a big ecosystem. There's a lot of money in it, and that attracts bad actors. What we do is we have several layers that we use. We have on our supply side, we have a fraud company that works on that and eliminates non-human traffic, that is human traffic. On the buy side, where we're doing our ad serving, we have yet another company that's called IAS that's also looking past the supply side, but on the buy side to eliminate fraud. And then we have the last line of defense is actually our human ad ops team, right? So our ad ops team is looking at all of our campaigns on a daily basis and looking for things, because new publishers pop up every day, right? It's like whack-a-mole. So, we'll see things come up and brand new apps, and some of them are actually fraud, right?
Yeah.
And you can usually identify them by, obscenely high click-through rates, or we'll do things like analyze the number of milliseconds between the display and the click. Obviously, people cannot click on ads in under 100 milliseconds. So we do things like that. But then there's another category of just bad inventory, right? And so you'll see this more so on the app side of things, where someone will launch an app that is a real app, but it's a terrible place to advertise. Like, my best example is flashlight apps. People are constantly making these flashlight apps and getting them on the app store, and then they show up and you're like, okay, yes, that's an app, someone's using it, but someone that's using a flashlight on their phone is definitely not looking at your ad, right? So there's a lot to it, and it is an arms race, and it's something we deal with every day.
And then we touched on a little bit on optimizing campaigns. Can you give me a few examples on different ways you can optimize campaigns for different KPIs?
Yeah, so this is a big topic. We could probably talk about this for an hour all by itself, but some of the big tentpole items, I mentioned a few of them, are looking at specific publishers and which ones are converting well. As I mentioned, we've got very different types of content that seem to resonate with different brands. So that's one thing that we look at every day is here's a publisher report, which ones are performing well, which ones are not. And then you need to layer in the creative, right? So what does the ad unit look like? What is it saying? And again, we run campaigns where it's the same product in the same market, but one creative is clearly better than the other. And again, that can make your click-through rate, 200 to 300% different. And it's something we try to tell people all the time, which is that at the end of the day, marketing is about telling a story, right? Okay. And you have to tell a story to consumer. You have to demonstrate value to the consumer. And a lot of people skip that step and they want to just run ads and get people to click. But we can get the ads in front of the right people. But if the story is not there for the consumer, you're gonna end up with a really high bounce rate. People they're not gonna convert.
Got it. And as far as launching a campaign, how much money do you need to start?
It depends a lot on your market, but there's definitely a lower threshold with programmatic where we would recommend to just not do it at all, right? If you come in and you say, I want to spend, I want to buy $1,000 worth of ads in my market, that's probably not a good use of $1,000. Actually, there is a certain level of saturation that you need. You need to, as we mentioned before, a consumer needs to see your ad. You mentioned 7 times, it could be a dozen times, before they'll even think of you as someone that they want to interact with.
Yep.
That process takes time. And again, also that's why I set things up over 90 days, right? Which is, you can't just go out and spend $1,000 on ads in one day. And that's just a waste of money. I would actually recommend getting someone with a sign on the street and waving it or something else, rather than try to run a programmatic campaign.
Wonderful. We had a question from the audience here is how long should you wait before you analyze the the results from the A/B test?
Well, that's a good question. We don't wait very long ourselves, our ad ops team, and we start to look at stuff within the first week and start to make tweaks. So in terms of like the lower level tactical optimizations, that's happening pretty much from the beginning. But you do have to wait long enough to see sales happen, and then go back and see what publishers or what creatives are the ones that are driving those sales, because they will be wildly different. I mean, you can have one creative that way outperforms others. We ran a campaign for a THC CBD product in California, and the creative, there were two versions of the creative. One had, a jar of, CBD salve, and just the jar. And the other one had a hand holding the jar. And I don't remember which one it was, but one of them performed, had double the CTR of the other. I don't even know psychologically why that happened. And this is why we say test and learn.
Yeah.
But yeah, you do need enough time to start to see the sales happening, and then work backwards and say, oh, I just realized that 80% of my sales are coming from people inside of, dating apps versus, weather apps, or news versus, gossip.
Got it. I have another question here. Last question from the audience. How does MediaJel differentiate itself from other cannabis programmatic solutions like ServeSide, Programmatrix, Philo, and others?
Yeah, I touched on that a little bit earlier. We take a very hands-on approach to our campaigns, and we're not trying to just be a media agency that is trying to sell the most impressions as we can. We focus on how do we get returns for our customers. We take a very active role. If you're advertising with us, you have a customer success manager. That's someone that you're talking to on a regular basis. For many of our advertisers, we have shared Slack channels with them, so we have real-time collaboration. And things happen in cannabis, right? Maybe your Google My Business account gets messed up for some reason, or your store is closed, or you're out of product. This happens a lot, right? We're running a campaign for someone, it's effective, and then they don't have that product anymore, and we need to be able to respond pretty much in real time to shut that campaign down, redirect that ad buy, and so that's probably the top level thing that I would say. I do think if we brought our technology team, they would have their own opinions on why we're better at the way that we target our ads. But that's broadly speaking the approach we take as a company.
Wonderful. And kind of the last few minutes here, is there any parting comments or things you'd like to share with the audience before we log off today?
I'll again reemphasize the concept of story, right? We are a channel to help you tell your story to consumers. We are not your storyteller. You are your storyteller. It's your brand. You have to help us tell us what you want to tell consumers. And then when we find those consumers and deliver them to you, you need to have a consistent story. So they need to go, because you could have a really cool ad that tells you all about your founding story, what your ethics are as a company, what your product offering is. But again, if you don't think through the storyline, you ultimately probably won't be very successful.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Jake, for sharing all your insights into programmatic. I know we can talk about this for hours, and I'm sure we'll cover a few other topics over the next few months. Just once again, MediaJel, we are focused on connecting cannabis, CBD, alcohol businesses with compliant consumers. And as Jake mentioned, with the multi-touch attribution model, we're able to see how all this connects with consumer during their buying journey. So check us out at MediaJel.com. If you'd like to set up a call to kick off a pilot programmatic campaign, go to MediaJel.com and just go to our contact form, or just email Jake at MediaJel.com and we'll kick it off.
Great. Thanks, Guillermo.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Jake. Take care.